Well, thank you guys so much for being here to present, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today. I'm Gabriella. This is Mari. We're Ecology Project International's alumni team. And this is going to be our third presentation as part of the alumni webinar series. We created this series to continue with conservation education for anyone that's ever traveled with EPI or as part of our awesome alumni community. And we're super, super excited. So just a little bit of Zoom expectations. There might be a little bit of interaction in this presentation. And while we encourage you to participate, you're welcome to engage as much or as little as you'd like. Feel free to engage or ask questions and answer prompts throughout, either via mic or the chat. The presentation will last around 50 minutes and we'll have some extra time at the end for lingering questions. And thank you so much for being here.
All right. So our first presenter, Duane, is Fish, Wildlife, and Parks AmeriCorps Program Manager. Prior to his work with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Duane worked for 15 years in public education, where he spent most of his summers packing mules into Bob Marshall Wilderness for the Rich Ranch out in Seeley Lake. His current role melds his passion for the outdoors and helping people become the best versions of themselves. And then our second presenter, Ryan, is an education and customer service technician with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. In his role, he travels across Western Montana delivering hunter education, wildlife education, and a variety of outdoor learning programs for students, instructors, and the public. Ryan began his career with the agency through AmeriCorps and as the team lead in 2025 and quickly transitioned into a full-time position with the agency. So today's presentation, Dwayne and Ryan are going to provide an overview of the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks AmeriCorps program, showing the impact of the service in conservation efforts, educational outreach, and volunteer recruitment efforts. And then after that discussion, um, Ryan is going to provide some insights on his personal experience with the program. So take it away.
Excellent, thank you. And welcome to you guys. I appreciate you guys jumping on here. And I guess what I'd like to do is I just like this presentation is going to be about Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks AmeriCorps program. And so to give you kind of a wide overall view, I will provide you you start think of a funnel. We'll start very broad with the program as a whole, how AmeriCorps fits into the national scene, how AmeriCorps fits into Montana, and then Fish, Wildlife, and Parks role in AmeriCorps. And then Ryan will conclude this presentation with his experience as our team lead for the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks AmeriCorps program in 2024. And so that's kind of the broad overview of it. And what I'd like to do is just get started by we don't have I think we have enough people in the audience that we can just if everybody's okay with it, I am wide open to hearing brief introductions from yourselves to kind of know where we're if you're comfortable with that. Kind of the audience we're talking to, if so you have any at this point, whoever's willing to, and you're welcome to come off mute, introduce yourselves, and engage to the level you are welcome to do so.
We can also feel free to introduce ourselves in the chat too. Sometimes people are more comfortable with that. So
Also, Dwayne, as a side note, I'm not sure if you are sharing your screen yet, so if you want to go ahead and do that, you can.
I sure will.
Awesome, thank you.
So you should be seeing the screen, and I started with this just kind of a broad overview of where we're at with FWP AmeriCorps. And what I'd like to do is when I say that, when you hear the term AmeriCorps, when I think of AmeriCorps, um, kind of question I have for you is what's a one word, if you had to describe it in one word. And what I have for you guys is we have, if you've never used Menti, I encourage you to go, if you have a cell phone in front of you or you have another, you just open another window, you just go to menti.com. They're going to ask you to use a code. The code is right here on the user. If you are able to go in there, 32171625 is the code, and describe, if you hear the term AmeriCorps, what's the first thing that you think of? And I'm also going to, while you're getting started, guys, I'm gonna, just to keep this easy, can I ask you, Ryan, just to put this code into the chat as well, just to make sure it is in the chat? And that way that'll allow me to shift over to the screen itself, the Menti screen. Okay, so I see when you're looking here, you see some of the terms you're coming up: hard work, helpful, employment, growth, volunteer, nationwide. These are all great terms. Aligned with, you've got assistance. And you're all right on track. When you look at service, definitely service oriented. So what I wanted to do is, when we talk about AmeriCorps, if any of you have served a term in AmeriCorps, this may, I appreciate it. And I guess this is in some ways a kind of tie back into maybe a little bit of a memory lane for you. But this is also helpful service. You start seeing these words tie back in. And I will jump back into my slide presentation. What I wanted to do in the next phase is I wanted to talk about, again, this funnel approach. When I talk about national service and AmeriCorps, we're going to tie it into Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. But before we do, we're going to talk about a larger AmeriCorps in Montana. Just to give you context, this image here was taken 2 years ago, and these are all the AmeriCorps Montana members at that point in time. Every year we have a symposium, Carroll College. So they're standing on the steps of Carroll College right there. And those are all the AmeriCorps members and that would have been 2024, if my math is right. So are there any readers in the group? If you are, have you heard of the author Will James? So Will James was a turn of the century author, and I will say some of my English background ties into this a little bit, but what I wanted to talk about with AmeriCorps, kind of the initial origins, is what is attributed to the initial origins of AmeriCorps. Is this idea of Will James wrote an essay titled "The Moral Equivalent of War." And in a nutshell, what he essentially argued was, instead of having our young people go into the military for a draft, allow them the option to do service domestically within the nation. And so that was his context of the moral equivalent of war, is using that energy in young people to make a difference in the communities around them. So that was an early turn of the century, around 1910. And then you saw that idea percolate, and then the Great Depression kind of rolled in from a national perspective. And once the Great Depression rolled in, many of people, as if you study the Great Depression, a lot of people lost their jobs. So there was a need for helping people and making a living, essentially. And under the Franklin Roosevelt, a New Deal, part of that's where you hear a lot of these terms. CCC is probably the most common one. It's kind of alphabet soup. But in essence, the Civilian Conservation Corps was created along with many other organizations intended to lift the nation out of that depression. It was also to give people employment. And if you look around you, just even within Montana, within wherever you are at, for example, if you look at the Lewis and Clark Caverns, if you've ever taken a tour inside the caverns, the steps built into the caverns where you walk down through, that was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. So it gives you a context of what we're talking about in a larger context. How does this tie into home here? If any of you are familiar with eastern Montana, perhaps you know the Fort Peck Reservoir, right? So Fort Peck Reservoir was another CCC larger project during this period in time. So just kind of orient you towards these periods in time. Now, the Civilian Conservation Corps, like I had said, was probably the most prominent one within the New Deal under Franklin Roosevelt during the World War II era. And it was operating from 1933 to 42. The reason it was defunded in 42 was just because there was a war effort going on during World War II, and they ended up pulling a lot of the youth into the war effort at that period in time. But from 33 to 42, a lot of young people had spent times building trails, shelters. And so if you see some of these other, I know going to the Sun Road in Glacier Park, some of those efforts were also done by the Civilian Conservation Corps and some of those larger groups. So think of in those terms and like other places you visited or other places you may call home. If you haven't paid much attention to CCC work, start looking at some of these places you go to and dig into the question of who's responsible for building some of these things. So that was giving you kind of a context. And then a little bit of a walk in history. 1944 rolls around. Now you're starting the end of the war. And that was when the GI Bill, the United States Congress passed the GI Bill. And this was basically to provide veterans with money for education, low interest loans, low cost mortgages. So it was really this first time that and why is this important? Because you're linking education and service together. So in return for service to your country, there's an educational opportunity. So when you think about it in national terms, in today, you may think of that in like within AmeriCorps, and it may seem second nature, but keep in mind this concept in 1944 under the GI Bill was the first time we saw this in play within the nation. And then jumping forward a little bit, 1950 to 1961, you've probably all heard of Peace Corps. So Peace Corps is really came out of the Kennedy administration. He had his famous words in his inaugural address, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And he established the Peace Corps. And he said, this is the beginning of what we now know as that stipend volunteer service. So you're providing volunteer service, there's a stipend tied to that stipend. Peace Corps is still alive and well. Oftentimes, if people are not familiar with AmeriCorps, you say Peace Corps, they'll be like, yeah, I know what Peace Corps is. And a great way to describe Peace Corps is it's international focused. AmeriCorps is nationally focused. So those are the kind of, if you think about those two terms, that's a great way to delineate those, the AmeriCorps and Peace Corps. Then we come into the war on poverty under President Johnson in 1964. This is where you hear the terms Vista. And Vista was really born out of that effort on the war on poverty, where Americans could serve full time in impoverished communities to help alleviate some of those communities across the country and alleviate some of the pain they had related to poverty. So Vista is still alive and well, and you see it in every state. There's a Vista program. Montana, there's a Vista program going as well. So Vista, AmeriCorps Vista is just a derivation from the larger AmeriCorps. And then to give you, again, to keep moving along in our little walk through history. The 70s and 80s, you started having the Youth Conservation Corps was a direct descendant of what is now was the Civilian Conservation Corps. Because if you remember, that was stopped in beginning of World War II. And so Youth Conservation Corps, YCC, came into play in the 1970s. 1980s, under the Reagan administration, you started seeing this effort on reducing the federal deficit. And as a result of that, what you had is it put a lot more efforts or a lot more on the private citizens to provide funding to support this volunteer effort. So what came out of that are these larger nonprofits. Campus Compact. Many campuses across the nation still have Campus Compact. For example, University of Montana has a Campus Compact AmeriCorps. And so you saw this come out of this 1980s, the Reagan administration. And then we shifted into the late 80s, into the 90s, and the first Bush administration ended up, he made a remark that individual serving neighbors are like 1,000 points of light. There is currently today a Points of Light Foundation that is closely affiliated with the AmeriCorps program. And in 1990, President Bush had signed what was the National and Community Service Act. But it wasn't until 1993 that President Clinton signed what is known as it's the CNCS, the acronym is, but it's the National and Community Service Trust Act. And that is AmeriCorps. That is the AmeriCorps we know of today. So if you look at AmeriCorps and kind of its origins, I've taken you a little bit on a trip across the pathway of how did we get to AmeriCorps? and how did that in 93 and where is it at today? So then in the early 2000s, you had in the State of the Union address, you had the second Bush call on Americans to dedicate at least 2 years of service to others. And then in 2009, you had the reauthorization and an expansion of AmeriCorps under the Edward Kennedy Serve America Act during the Obama administration. So those were critical years in building up where we're at with AmeriCorps today. And that is, but like I said, that's the much larger funnel. When you look at AmeriCorps, you may notice two different brands. If you see a brand here on what I have on the screen on the left, that's the initial branding of AmeriCorps, and it has been in place since 1993. It wasn't until 2020 that there was a rebranding of AmeriCorps, and that rebranding is over here on the right side. For example, Montana rebrand their AmeriCorps it says AmeriCorps and then Montana right below it. And that's usually state-specific branding ties in with that. So then if you look at AmeriCorps today, there's always going to be, it's tied to federal funds. So we have a program, a nonprofit, and in our case, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, a state agency. We run an AmeriCorps program. So the question, like, we always have to tie back into identifiable data and goals that we can measure, that we can report back. So we state our goals, the number of members we have, or we want for the grant awards. And so if you look at some of that opportunity, what are in AmeriCorps, what are some of those key needs and what were they called focus areas? So educational outreach is a big one, economic opportunity, disaster response, environmental stewardship, healthy futures, veterans and military families. And then kind of more recent addition in the last 7 years to AmeriCorps has been capacity building. And what that means is when you bring in members and you build capacity in those members to help them in post-career. And quite honestly, this is where Ryan Binga really shines. He comes in as the exemplar of that capacity building within an AmeriCorps program, having being able to find a career post-AmeriCorps very closely related with his AmeriCorps term. And just to get into the weeds one last little bit before I dive out of it on the national end, the yellow up here on the screen, that's your federal money. That's your federal grants. And on the left-hand side, if you are a state organization like Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, you come through a state service commission. It's typically the governor's office at that specific state. So that's how AmeriCorps, or Fish, Wildlife, and Parks runs their AmeriCorps program. There are exceptions to the rule on that. Like, for example, if you have NCCC, if you've heard of NCCC, they serve across multiple states. And then you'd get your program funding directly from the federal end. Whereas if you're operating in one state, it comes from the federal to the state governor's office to the organization. So before I dive into a state-specific focus on this and really narrow it down, if you have any questions, jump in the chat. I will, if there's anything there, just let me know.
Can I ask you a quick question, Duane?
You bet. Absolutely.
So, how is it that a particular, organization ends up having an AmeriCorps program? Like what does that process look like?
So the process looks basically, first of all, is there looking at identifying the need. Is the need that is in that community, is it tied back to any one of those larger like those drivers that I had pointed out? And then the second question is, okay, there's a need there. Is there a capacity for an organization, whether that's a nonprofit, whether that's a state agency, to provide matching funds for the AmeriCorps program? And you may say, okay, what is a matching fund? The minimum required match fund is 30% for state to match the federal funding. On Fish, Wildlife, and Parks AmeriCorps program, we try to run a very robust program. So our match fund is about 45, 46%. It's quite a bit above the required match funds. So to answer your question, it's a great question, but it really is how much internal support do you have? And that's going to be a large determiner in the success of having an AmeriCorps program within a nonprofit organization. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
You bet. And I will now jump into this is Montana programs. So the question may be, okay, you've talked about AmeriCorps, cool. I know where it started. That's all cool. Now narrow it down for me. If I look in Montana, what programs are in Montana? And this is just to give you a brief overview. We also have University of Montana Justice, that is Campus Compact is on here as well. But we have Big Sky Watershed Corps. They are tied in with the Montana Conservation Corps. So if you don't see MCC, which you probably have seen their vehicles, if you've spent time in Montana trailheads, you'll see the Montana Conservation Corps. Big Sky Watershed Corps is affiliated with MCC, and MCC is more of the state is the large does multiple states, so they get their funding directly from the feds, where these organizations here get their funding from the governor's office in the state of Montana. Department of Agriculture, they started their program. They're in year 3 of running an AmeriCorps program. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, we've been in play since 2012. And then Montana State University Health Corps, if you're have paid attention to the news this last fall, this is year 1 of a core program where they have many different programs across, uh, most of them oriented towards reservations and health clinics on reservations. And then we have Justice for Montanans, which is basically it's a legal, oh, Montana Legal Fund, I believe, is this funding source for it. But it's a lot of aspiring lawyers who spend the time prior to taking their bar exam, and they serve as the term in Justice for Montanans. So they provide free legal services across the state of Montana. And then I dive into Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. This is a photo here just a month ago. 3 of our current members who were down in Bannock working on a jackleg fence to keep the kind of just to help establish some of the boundaries. They had cows from private lands pushing into the state park. And then Montana State Parks and Recreation. So we are the source of the FWP funding. Who are we? So we've got 56 state parks. Our members currently are across 12 of those state parks. Our newest state park is Judith Landing State Park up here in Great Falls area. Of those state parks, 7 of them are National Historic Landmarks. And then just to give you a context for data, when you look at that need from an AmeriCorps perspective, you can see there's a 27% increase in visitors since 2015. There was this big spike during the COVID years in Montana. And if you spent time here and been in Montana since 2020, you're familiar with that, right? You saw the COVID spike. It was a real thing where you saw a lot of population influx, and you still have this high increase number of users across the state parks. And this visitation report is updated as of just a few weeks ago for very recent. So then when you look at, okay, how are state parks funded? When you go to a state park, where does the funding come from? Breaking this down, the vast majority of state parks are funded by your vehicle registration. When you have a vehicle in the state of Montana, you pay your registration fee. There's like a $9 registration fee that you pay for, and for non-residents, they pay a park fee. So that's 43% of revenue. License dollars, fishing, hunting license, 11%. Hotel taxes are 18%. These are motorboat fuel decals, 12%. Coal taxes, 9%. 4% comes from the federal end. And then enterprise, in other words, you may say, what is enterprise? That's the gift shops you see across state parks. That's in that percentage. So that gives you just kind of a breakdown. And then there's like the challenges of managing some of these state parks and the education, the communication around that. Keep in mind, we're stewarding more than 350 historic and archaeological sites. We have 2 archaeologists on staff, one for the west side, one for the east side of Montana, 7 National Historic Landmarks, and 11 of those sites are currently National Register of Historic Places. So you tie in all of those high user numbers, you tie in all of those components, and you start getting the picture of resources, right? And how this all ties in with the need. Public service. So you're providing these services for recreation for the public, but that also with the high visitor numbers starts putting a strain on the resource. So the challenge is always conservation versus preservation. And when you tie into that, just to give you an idea of if you spent any time in conservation preservation, I'm just going to simplify it and narrow it down, is conservation is oftentimes seen as you view the land as a community and you have responsible use of the land accordingly. Where preservation, John Muir is best known for really adopting this concept and idea of preservation where sometimes you don't need to take anything tangible or physical from the wild places, and we need those wild places for our own psyche and our well-being. So you have these conservation preservation. It's with land resource management. That's a big part of FWP state parks and what an AmeriCorps member faces during their term of service. And so just to give you context, this year is a big year for what we have at the state parks. We have a 50th anniversary event at Bannock State Park in July. And then we also have down here Rosebud Battlefield State Park 150th commemoration event. Our AmeriCorps members go to all of these. And then Travelers Rest also has a 25th anniversary event there near Missoula. So that's an overview of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, the parks who has the program. So then where are the AmeriCorps members? So currently we have 16 AmeriCorps members across 12 different sites. And you can see them spread out over here. The furthest east is clear out in Glendive in Makoshika. If you have never spent time in Makoshika, it is the coolest place you'll ever see. It's really, really cool. All the way over to northwestern part of the state, Lone Pine State Park, right outside of Kalispell, down to Bannock, up to Giant Springs, First Peoples Buffalo Jump. So give you an idea of where our members are at. What do we do as a program? What is our focus? We're enhancing that state park lands. We're enriching educational opportunities. We're building volunteer capacity. We're strengthening community outreach. And just as a precursor to Ryan, who's going to be speaking here in a minute, one of the big components as a team lead in his role is he was also, as a team lead, he was based in Helena. And he split his time between a team lead and Montana Wild in Helena. So a lot of his focus was on enriching those educational opportunities, educational outreach. And that's why you see Ryan today he has a position in Region 2 ComEd, Communication Education. And that's a lot of where that comes from. Our members are not, it's unique to each site. We have some members who are strictly a trails position, and their focus is on coordinating big projects, coordinating volunteers, trail work. That's their focus. Other members are entirely focused on educational outreach. Cave tours at the caverns, the 1 hour Paradise tour, instead of the larger tour that they give at the caverns, is a brainchild of AmeriCorps, FWP AmeriCorps, because they wanted to make sure the people who were in wheelchairs had accessibility concerns. They could still view the park. And so the AmeriCorps member who was there in 2013 came up with this idea of, why don't we give a shorter tour? And it doesn't include the steep steps, right? So you can go in the bottom, you can give the tour, you can come back out. And so just to give you context of some of the really cool things that have happened across the years with AmeriCorps members. So AmeriCorps is pretty well established within the program as a whole. And I'm just going to jump through. I don't know if you guys are data nerds. Since 2012, total acres have been 5,008 acres treated, 241 miles of trail impacted, 177,000 individuals have received education from AmeriCorps members, and then 6,577 volunteers were recruited. This is all part of what the AmeriCorps program is, right? You're part of something larger. Keeping in mind, you're part of something larger in Montana, you're part of something larger nationally. And a big piece of what AmeriCorps does is member development. And that's something that, from my educational background, I really, really care deeply about this process of finding the right fit. When we recruit every year, our program runs from middle of January until middle of November. It's a 10-month term. Members serve 1,700 hours. And that's a full term of service. So members come out of that term of service, they receive biweekly living allowances. And they also, at the end of the term of service, get a $7,300 education award that's tied in with this term of service that they have. So when we recruit starting in October, we're always trying to find the right fit, the right members, finding that right fit. And the big piece of it is to try to make sure that the member walks away, not only having served, but having become a better version of themselves. And it's a really big piece of that member development. And I tie in, for example, Ryan is one of 7 individuals who are currently full-time employees at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks who started as FWP AmeriCorps members. So there's a pathway there, right? And there's quite a bit of buy-in across the agency for AmeriCorps because in many ways, some of our members are also what I say, you may not see them in the agency, but there's quite a few members who are in nonprofit land trust. So there's still agencies who work with FWP who have an AmeriCorps or like a connection. So once you start connecting and you start talking about AmeriCorps, you pretty soon you find out all these people who've been at AmeriCorps, and it's kind of this big family in Montana, and it's a really, really cool component of it. And that's something that within Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is something we really, really emphasize and strive for within the program is that member experience, member development. And part of that component is when members come in, and I'll let Ryan talk about this even in more detail, but really when you first come in, members come in, they usually have low confidence, low knowledge of what this is about, and they're looking at going, what is going on, right? And then it usually very quickly within the first month in term of service, it's your confidence goes up, but your knowledge base hasn't reached the same trajectory. So it's like, okay, this is really easy. But then as a result of that, as you gain more knowledge and skill sets, you start realizing, oh my gosh, this is more difficult. And so you see this trough. And we build our program around the first 4 months of a term of service with orientations and member events geared towards bringing everybody together to help us come through some of this, what we call the trough. Because at the end of it, when you're done, you have high skill level, high confidence, and it propels you into a trajectory of a post-AmeriCorps career. So that's just to give you kind of a broad overview. We provide all member monthly calls, one-on-one calls. We have a team lead who does one-on-one calls. We work with resume building, interviewing skills. We bring in a panel of alumni, which Ryan will be a part of. And so these are some of the events to give you an idea. I think the highlight event of this, we have first day of service, right? And then member orientation it's 4 days here in Helena. Then we have certified interpretive guide training. We invest a substantial amount of money in our members to get every single one walking away within the first month and a half of service to be a certified interpretive guide, which is a 40-hour course, 40 hours required to get the CIG training. And it has paid dividends across the parks for members having the confidence to provide educational programs. And then you will see we have the Serve Montana Symposium, all members coming together in Carroll College. That first picture I showed you. Our all-member gathering this year is at Rosebud. It's a service focus. And then every year we're also at Bannock Days. We're at Day of Honor at Chief Plantico State Park, south of Billings in Region 5. And then close of service happens November 20th. And members provide a presentation. They they reflect on their term of service. And then that is the end of the term of service. So I feel like in a nutshell, I've kind of fire hosed you probably a little bit with a bunch of information, and I apologize for that. But I was going to use this time to just turn it over to Ryan. And Ryan, like I said, he was introduced. Initially, he's the Region 2 education technician. And those positions were created by the 2025 state legislature. 7 education technicians across 7 regions in the state for communication education focus. And so Ryan came out of the AmeriCorps term of service, and he is now a full-time FWP employee. So what I wanted to have Ryan do is just kind of focus on this next piece of what is it like to be an AmeriCorps member within the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks program. So Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Man, you've hit on so many points that we're going to cover. It's going to be like a review of a review. So we get to review my AmeriCorps service, what I did, and how it kind of led me to where I'm at right now. And then we're going to review what Duane just talked about because a lot of it is very similar. And I want to kind of reflect. Obviously, he's program manager. He's big person. He's the one overseeing everyone. I want to kind of talk about what it's like from the individual standpoint, from the member who's there. So I was well, just that to say 2025, because that was last year, 2025 FWP AmeriCorps Team Lead. And I am currently the Education and Customer Service Technician over in Missoula or Region 2. And I start with why AmeriCorps, and that's why not. The first is the variety of programs. We've talked about the programs that FWP offers and FWP AmeriCorps, but it's important to talk about how their education, their conservation, their interpretive, that CIG training, but also leadership roles. That's something that it's really hard to come by, especially whether you're right out of high school, coming straight out of college. If you didn't have that kind of leadership potential or that leadership opportunity beforehand, FWP offers that. Big thing kind of schooling wise is educational benefits. Yes, we have the educational award at the end, $7,200. That's great. But also forbearance. You have loan forbearance payments throughout your entire term service. It's 11 months. I know coming right out of school, I was broke. I didn't have a lot of money. I wasn't about to make some payments. And so that forbearance was huge. Get my feet on the ground, start running, and then interest too. Those student loans rake up interest exponentially. I think some of them are at about 7.5%. So interest payments are actually delayed, and all interest accrued during service is actually paid for if you go through and you submit the proper paperwork. So just other beneficial things that happen. Again, 11 months is a long time. It doesn't seem like it, and it's going to fly by when you're in service, but those 11 months of interest, interest-free forbearance with the Ed Award. I'm still using my Ed Award to this day to pay off my student loans. So super beneficial. And then the experience and training. So Duane talked on CIG training, whether it's wilderness first aid training, whether it's just normal first aid training, CPR, any of these trainings, something that maybe you wouldn't have gotten outside of AmeriCorps is offered to you. And like Blaine said, they put an emphasis on it immediately in that start. And then also travel. It hasn't been noticed or hasn't been said, but that's a photo of me on the right side there. I'm from Arizona, and that is a photo of Arizona right there. So a lot of people think Arizona's desert. It's in the forest, but whole variety. I had never been to Montana before I moved out here for the AmeriCorps position last January. So that travel, whether it's just within the state or across the country, wherever it may be, those travel opportunities are fantastic through AmeriCorps, and everyone's super supportive of it. And so my AmeriCorps term and my AmeriCorps experience, I don't like words on slides, so you get a bunch of photos of me and all the fun things I got to do. We'll kind of start on the top left and down to the bottom right. All of this is that education and outreach. So I was the team lead, and a lot of that revolved around those one-on-one conversations with the other members, working with Duane to help prepare for those all-member gatherings and those member meetings. But it was also a lot of education. And that education varies from our top left talking about bears and bear diets to 3 to 5 year olds and their families, or the bottom left there, we're doing a bird survey with a group of young families there and some young birders. And next to that, we have some adult birders who had never gone out, and we did an intro to waterfowl ID class, and we're at a rookery over in Helena on the regulating reservoir. On the bottom right is the NAI, National Association for Interpretation. The meeting that we had last year happened to be in Missoula, so Duane and I got to go out and table and talk about what we do with FWP AmeriCorps and AmeriCorps Montana and the service we have. Also, hunter's education. That is a direct tie-in to what I'm doing right now. I help my IO or information officer manage the entire hunter's education program in Region 2. So from Sealy Lake down to Anaconda, that's our region. We help prep and manage all of the hunter's education there. And then last but not least, maybe some of the most fun I have ever had is those middle photos are all intro screenshots from our Instagram, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We did our Wildlife Wednesdays. So it's not just in-person communication that you're doing in education, but to the broad world of social media. Obviously, that's how a lot of people know EPI. It's how a lot of people know Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And getting to communicate with people in that way too was super helpful. And it was kind of a creative outlet. You got to talk about anything that was really relevant to the time, but it was free reign for whatever I want to talk about. So we did the 12 days of bird miss. We highlighted International Steak Day. We talked about skulls and bones and furs and all of these different wildlife and conservation topics. And they got out to thousands of people on the social media, which is always fun to see. And all of that shaped me and kind of helped me get to where I needed to. And it provided those new experiences. I never thought I'd be on one in Montana, two serving with AmeriCorps, and now in a full-time position with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And so my time in AmeriCorps helped me realize all of those different career paths and different ways that I could go into conservation, into wildlife, into whatever career field that you're looking for. Photos like me holding our little raptor Blossom right there. So again, all these new career paths that you see and that you may have not known about, you get introduced to. Second is networking opportunities. You don't realize how many people you meet until you start meeting people and you've forgotten all of their names immediately. And that's not just networking opportunities within Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Like Duane said, we have 8 members, and I'm hoping that includes Savannah, who is the park ranger over at Travelers now. But you're networking with non-government agencies, nonprofits, maybe even federal agencies. I met a bunch of people in the Forest Service that I still talk with while in my time with AmeriCorps. Also, the nonprofits like the Blackfoot Challenge, Helena Corps, people like that. You're networking not just within the agency that you're working with or within the program, but also everyone that you're going to be interacting with. And that's so many people. New friends is the big one too. I would not be mentally sane if I didn't have the friends that I made in AmeriCorps. I still talk with them. They work right down in Travelers Rest in Lolo. Luke came back, Savannah is now the park ranger over there, and I can't give them enough praise for how great of people they are. And I was just so happy to meet them. Someone from South Carolina and from Colorado and Arizona all meeting in Montana, and now we hang out every other weekend. It's great. And then appreciation. And this is where that photo on the bottom left there comes from. It is a Goyutaku painting of some salmon in Seattle. I went on a personal trip after AmeriCorps and I saw this at the ferry station and I thought, oh my goodness, this is the coolest thing ever. And everyone looked at me like I was crazy taking photos. And it's the appreciation because I learned new things while in AmeriCorps. I got to teach kids how to print Goyutaku, which is Japanese fish prints. And seeing them outside in the wild gave me a new appreciation for it. And it's not just the appreciation for the knowledge you gain, but also the appreciation for all of those experiences that you learned, for the career paths you learned about, and also the new friends that you make along the way too. So fun little photo down in the bottom right, or in the bottom kind of middle there of all the program managers and education managers going and cutting down our Christmas tree. So it was a good, again, community aspect. You make new friends, you're networking not within just the agency, but also all of the organizations that you work with too. And so how that kind of led me to where I'm at now in this full-time educational communication role with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, those certifications and trainings were huge, specifically CIG training. And it's not just the training and having that to be able to write onto a resume, but also the confidence it builds, which Duane had said earlier, which is why I said we're bouncing back and reflecting. Confidence. No matter if you're doing a trail stewardship position or you're doing an educational position at Montana Wild or you're a heritage technician over at Travelers Rest, you're going to be talking with people, whether it's one-on-one, in big groups, other entities, other managers in different groups, and just to build the confidence in the work that you can do as a solo person, but also in your personal skills that you develop over time. Like Duane said, we're not just trying to better Montana or better where we're working at, but you're trying to better yourself too. and you build a lot of confidence. And that's through the leadership that you're kind of tasked with, whether you are the team lead or individual points of leadership that you're forced to do. You are recruiting volunteers, and you're going to be the leader for that volunteer group where you're cutting in trail or pulling noxious weeds or leading a field trip for the 25th anniversary of Travelers Rest. All of these things are just little micro leadership roles that you have to take on. And you don't realize you're doing it until after service, and you realize, oh, I can now go to reference the bottom photo here, I can go to a bear talk at Travelers Rest and talk with these people on Memorial Day, one of the highly or most visited times in Montana, and give all these people bear aware knowledge and be able to talk about it. Or I can walk into the doors of EPI and do an impromptu bear spray training, which is what that bottom right photo is. While I was giving a presentation to 250 students over at one of the high schools here in Missoula. So that leadership goes back and it builds that confidence, and that confidence helps you become a better leader. And those two work really well. And you, again, see those little pieces here and there throughout service. And then last but not least is the foot in the door. Everyone always says it, the euphemism, you got the foot in the door. I stayed with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and it was fantastic. I love the role I'm in. And like Duane said, it's a direct correlation. But that foot in the door is with all those other partners that you communicate with too, those non-government agencies, the federal organizations, other state organizations. I work with Missoula County Ecology Extension now a lot, or nonprofits like the Blackfoot Connection, who I worked with and I still continue to work with, are all foots in the door because you have met the people, you've connected, you've networked with all of these folks, and they've seen what you can do, and they know that your heart's in it because you're serving. You're not just there to get a paycheck and leave. You know, they know you're there to better yourself. They know that you're there to grow as a person. You know that you're there to help grow the program too. So that foot in the door is super important. And again, I know I rambled on, like I said. I like talking about what I've done and I like showing it off, but hopefully it's opened up some opportunities for questions for you guys. And again, I'm super happy to be here and glad that I was able to come out and talk to you guys.
Thank you so much, you guys. That was such a great presentation. I think I might go to AmeriCorps now. I'm convinced. Let me share my screen here really quickly. Well, I am going to open the floor to anyone who might have any questions. I might start us off because I have a few questions myself. Um, so I'm kind of curious about like what is like the primary demographic of AmeriCorps and what makes someone the right fit for an AmeriCorps program?
That's a great question. I would say the primary demographic for AmeriCorps, just by default of our applicants, is going to be people in their 20s who have typically a degree in outdoor recreation, biology, something outdoor related, and they want to see
Forestry.
forestry.
Shout
Thank
out my
you.
forestry peeps.
Thank you, Ryan. And they want to make sure that before they go into a career, that they're interested in to see what a state agency does. What does Montana FWP do? Is this a place I'd like to be at? And so that's the primary demographic. But I also say, let's not forget the importance of people who are changing careers. And I offer an example without providing the names of the individual. We have an individual who is now one of the 7 who's employed by FWP. They came on in their mid-50s and they had been in the finance world. And they said, I just can't do it anymore. I need to connect back to the outdoors. And they spent a term in AmeriCorps and they ended up currently they are employed as the ranger at the state park at which they served their AmeriCorps term. And they are now the site supervisor for 2 AmeriCorps who are currently there. So the demographic, I share that story with you because there's always exceptions to a rule. But I would say in a nutshell that the rule is typically somebody coming out of college with a degree looking for a career is the general. And then what is the right fit? The right fit is always, for example, some of our more it sometimes can be said, oh, some of our more difficult places to fill are Makoshika and Bannock because they're very remote. If you know anything about Glendive, Montana, it's very remote out there. So you need to have somebody who's okay being in a remote setting. Glendive is a very small community. You find the right members, they connect into the community gives them a party before they leave their AmeriCorps term, right? So that's what you're looking for in a fit. In Bannock, it's the same way. We have on-site housing in Bannock just because it's so remote. So you have to find somebody who's willing to drive. If you go to town anywhere to see other people other than visitors to a state park, you're 20 miles or you're 20 minutes to Dillon. And so keeping in mind those dynamics. And then we have a location in Billings. Well, Billings is our largest urban center in the state of Montana. So if somebody's coming to Montana and they want to have more outdoor, they want a very rural experience, probably don't want to sit them in Region 5. So I hope that answers your question without going into too much detail, but that's great questions, and I would say that's an overview. I don't know, Brian, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I might jump in and just say that they're motivated and they care. And it doesn't need to be about any specific topic, and it can be about a variety of topics. But from those who, one, that all of the members, all seven of us, from my term back in 2025, and then also just the current members as well, they're driven. They have a purpose, and that purpose is different for all of them, but they know what it is and they want to achieve it. And so I think if you're a motivated, driven person, it suits you a lot more than someone who might just be on the fence and say, I don't know if I want to fully commit to this. It's people who give it their all who fully commit, I think, end up doing the best in AmeriCorps, I'd say.
So the
Awesome.
And then,
specific question, Ian, is there a local office in Missoula? I honestly would point you to Ryan. He is in Missoula, and I would say go visit with Ryan, pick his brain, get all the info you can. The other thing, if you really want to know about AmeriCorps and see what it's about, I can talk to you about AmeriCorps from Helena. You're more than welcome to stop in here in Helena at any point in time. But really on the ground, stop in at Travelers Rest. Travelers Rest is a deeply embedded program. For example, the park manager at Travelers Rest was a FWP AmeriCorps member in 2021, and she is now the park manager there. The park ranger served AmeriCorps term there in 2024. And the current two members we have serving there, the one is serving his second term, and the other one is serving their first term. So if you really want to see, what's this all about, that's the local resources I'd ask you to tap into is Travelers Rest and Ryan. And if you get as much information, I'll put my email down in here too. I can send you we have a website. It's general. These are our different sites we have. That website gives you an idea of the various sites we have, what's available. It might change a little bit from year to year, but typically we have flagship programs that stay in place from year to year. So,
I'd say, yeah, 3201 Spurgeon. That is the FWP office. Come stop on by. I'll also put my email and my phone number and stuff through the chat. And then if you are, and pass the word along to other people in Missoula, every Saturday, one of the AmeriCorps members in Travelers Rest hosts a Trekker Kids. And it is Trekker Kids, but everyone's welcome, and you get to kind of see one of those educational aspects, a little bit hands-on on what they're doing and something that they created there too, which is really fun. So definitely checking that out as well every Saturday morning.
Thanks, guys. Two questions. Ryan, firstly, if you throw your number and email in the chat, can we share that with those that we're gonna post it to YouTube and send our newsletter out to and everything? Is that
Yes,
okay
of
with you?
course. Yeah,
Okay,
you can put it in like the
perfect.
description or whatever.
Awesome. And then secondly, how I know you talked about a little bit like if someone wants a really outdoorsy experience, you might send them to Region 5. But if they want something a little bit more urban, it might be closer to Billings. But when you enter AmeriCorps, since Ryan, you're from Arizona, do you get to pick what state you go to? Do you get to pick what kind of things you might be doing? I know I have some friends in AmeriCorps that were part of a more education-based, less outdoor-based organization. So do you get to pick that, or are you just kind of assigned where you go?
That's a fantastic question. You do get to choose, I guess with FWP AmeriCorps, you are in Montana. So you do get to choose what state you work in, but how it kind of functions is you choose your top three. And you go through, and again, as Duane said in the beginning, they're looking for the best fit. No one wants to set you up for failure. They don't want to put you in a spot where during your interviews, that you say one thing or you give off, hey, this person is really into something like this. We don't want to put them in a region where they wouldn't feel comfortable and that they wouldn't really fit the role the best. So you do have a choice almost. You put your top three and then they work around and those job offers kind of come in or the service offers come through that. So more so just a broadband, you throw out, yes, I'd love to be an educator with some sort of program and I'd love to talk about, oh man, I studied Lewis and Clark and their journey across. I'd want to be at Great Falls, Travelers Rest, or Lone Pine State Park. Duane's going to look at that and say, well, Lone Pine is off the list. No Lewis and Clark connection there. But those other two, you'd be a fantastic fit. And we want to make sure that you get into one of those. So the program managers and everyone who's working with the program, they understand that they want you to succeed and they want you to grow, not just in the position, but as a person. And so they're going to set you up not for failure, but for success with that. And with AmeriCorps, yes, you get to choose when you apply. It's like, and a lot of times the positions are posted on job boards and things like that too. And it's very similar to that. So obviously I wanted to be here in Montana and I'm happy I applied.
I
Kind
would
of
just
a
add one example of a member we currently have up at First People's Buffalo Jump. They applied specifically. They grew up in Cutbank. They live in Great Falls, and she is a Pakuni, and so she has wanted that position at First People's Buffalo Jump, so she could have an opportunity to provide educational, um, interpretive talks to the public, sharing her people's stories about how that jump was used throughout the generations. And so when you see those kind of applications, they're tailor-made for that spot, right? It's a natural fit, and that goes back to kind of doubling back into your initial question. That was a fit, and that is a fit, right? So if you ever have a chance, I'll just put a plug in. If you're ever up in Great Falls, they have summer tours up there. Stop in and say hi, and maybe take in one of those tours with our member up there.
Awesome. Kind of a short follow-up question because I know we're just at our time right now. Is it a relatively competitive pool of like is the application process relatively competitive? How many positions do you guys fill generally for like one term of service?
That's a great question. And generally, yes, it is. It kind of ebbs and flows also with the job market, to be quite honest with you, and how our recruitment goes. To give you an example, we have 16 positions this year that are all filled, and we had 56 applications.
Cool. Thank you so much. I'm gonna take one more second to see if there are any lingering questions. Audrey?
Not a
Hi.
question, more a comment. I want to really thank Duane and Ryan for the presentation. I joined today with the hopes of getting some more knowledge about what AmeriCorps is dedicated to, and I have to say I took notes and learned more than I thought. I was like making a few ideas here in my notebook because I would love to keep the connection between EPI and AmeriCorps and see how this can enrich both our communities. And I love to see the photo from the Missoula office with Carrie, Gabri, Mari, Gage. It was awesome. Thanks, Ryan, for that. So just say thank you. I learned a lot today, and I am grateful for the opportunity.
Thanks, Audrey. Well, I'll do my little outro here and then we can finish up the recording. So, thank you again to everyone for being here. Thank you, Duane and Ryan. That was a great presentation, a lot of really good information. And thank you to our attendees for coming and listening. We're going to send a recording to everyone via email and it will be accessible on YouTube. And then just to pitch our next webinar, this will be held on August 12th and it will be presented by EPI's Communication and Development Coordinator, Eric Bolaños. His presentation will explore how active listening, empathy, and connection with both people and places are essential for effective communication within the field of conservation. And we hope to see you all there. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye.